Welcome to Unit 13 of Systematic Theology 1. We are really getting to the good stuff now. We're talking about the doctrine of Christ, the person of Jesus Christ. And this is the introduction to Christology. And really what we want to do in this section is talk about the doctrine of Christ in three basic ways. We're going to talk first and foremost about the historical Jesus, and I want you to become familiar with some of the major trends in New Testament studies, really going back to the 18th century, whereby a lot of liberal Protestant New Testament scholars rejected traditional Christian beliefs about Jesus. And what I want you to become familiar with are some apologetic arguments and responses to these types of arguments, because a lot of people learn about Jesus from these sort of skeptical scholars that show up on the History Channel or on the Biography Channel or National Geographic who deny traditional Christian beliefs about Jesus. People like Bart Ehrman, people like John Dominic Crossan and the Jesus Seminar. And these are things that I think that you as ministers in local churches need to be familiar with, so you are able to respond to these sorts of skeptical challenges, not only when you meet skeptics outside of the church, but also you need to ready and prepare the people in your churches to be able to respond to these things, because they will be seeing these things on TV or magazine covers just about every year around Easter or Christmas. They tend to put these things out. So it's important that you become familiar with these things and sort of have a basic understanding of the quests for the historical Jesus. Now, I think there's a lot of apologetic and even theological value in the quest for the historical Jesus, because I think we want to build a case that the Jesus of history is in fact the Jesus represented by the gospel writers, because if that isn't true, then we are truly without hope. So we're going to read about the historical Jesus quest, and I have some videos from William Lane Craig and N.T. Wright, so you can hear some of their excellent overviews of these issues. And then what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the humanity of Jesus. And what I mean, we're going to talk about the humanity of Jesus theologically, and address some pretty interesting aspects to the humanity of Jesus. What did it mean for Jesus to be truly human? Well, it means that he had true human physicality. He had true human emotions. That Jesus, like Luke describes in Luke 2:52, grew in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and man. What that means is that Jesus grew intellectually. Jesus grew physically. Jesus grew socially. And Jesus also grew spiritually. One of the remarkable things about the incarnation is that God the Son entered into our world and had to grow along a trajectory that each and every one of us has to grow. He was like us in every way, yet without sin. And so I think the doctrine of humanity is a very the doctrine of Jesus' humanity is a very interesting and important topic to discuss. There's a related question, and that's the question of Jesus' impeccability. Was it possible for Jesus to sin? Yes or no? And this is a question that has interesting implications for our understanding of the way in which Jesus' human and divine natures relate to each other. Sometimes the question is posed, if Jesus couldn't really sin, was he really tempted? Did he face genuine temptations? And if Jesus really could sin, how could he be truly God? Because the Scripture explicitly says that God can't sin, that God can't lie, that God can't be tempted by sin. So there's some interesting implications that we're going to have to work through and try to make sense of with regards to the humanity of Jesus. And then the final presentation in this section is about the divinity of Jesus. Just again, sort of rehearsing some of the things that we've already talked about with regards to the doctrine of the Trinity, but also trying to make an apologetic case that Jesus was in fact divine. And of course we know this from Scripture in multiple places. We have big Christological hymns like what we see in Philippians 2, what we see in the introduction to the book of Hebrews, what we see in places like Colossians 1 and in John 1, these big sort of big picture Christological passages. But there are other places in Scripture that I think assert Jesus' divinity, but in ways that are a little bit more subtle. Particularly in the Gospels, we see Jesus saying and doing things that only God should be doing. Jesus is forgiving sins. Jesus is speaking with authority in a way that other prophets never spoke with authority. I mean, those other prophets would speak saying, "Thus saith the Lord," but Jesus says, "I tell you," because he speaks with a sort of authority that is uniquely divine. And we will go to places even like the Gospel of Mark, where the Gospel of Mark, I think, is making a pretty clear case for Jesus' divinity as well. So those are the sorts of things that we will be discussing in this unit. As usual, there's reading to do, and there's a quiz, and there is a discussion board question.